Hi, and welcome back to Bots and Beyond. Another fantastic guest, another great episode lined up for you this week. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Phil Heltewig to the show. Anyone who has been following, let's say, large language models and the role that they will play in the future of conversational AI hopefully will know who Phil is, will certainly know a company that he is CEO of, Cognigy, a long-term partner of ISG, certainly one of the market leaders within that conversational AI space. So this week we're going to talk to Phil about how large language models, let's say, revolutionizing customer service, customer support, and the world of conversational AI. So Phil, absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wayne. Super happy to be here and to be talking about this extremely exciting topic that we've all heard so much about and know so little about.
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. So I was just literally on with a client and, it was an hour's conversation. I think 40 minutes of it were taken up by what large language models are, where they're going, and us trying to figure out, I guess, what are the things that are going to change that will create value. So not the shiny objects, hey, this is cool, but where value can be created by using this capability. So it's great to speak to you about this. I was at our pre-call, was probably the one that I left with the most buzz on, because I was just so fascinated, let's say, with some of your views and some of the discussion that we were having there. So I know the audience are going to absolutely love this. Obviously, I know a lot about you personally, but I would love the audience to know a little bit more about Phil, what makes Phil tick. And so, as is standard for our Bots and Beyond guests, if you're able to confirm who you are, what you do, and more importantly, why you do it, Phil, that'd be great.
Sure, sounds great. So, yeah, my name, as you said, is Phil Heltewig. I'm the CEO of Cognigy AI, one of the world's leading enterprise conversational AI platforms. We're powering the conversational experiences for many large enterprises. And to say a little bit about myself, by trade, I'm a software developer with a business degree, which I guess is why I'm doing what I'm doing, which is building and leading Cognigy AI. Still heavily involved, obviously, with product roadmap and things like that, but also the business execution side of things. Right, I love tinkering with new technology, which LLMs, GPT, of course, squarely falls into as well, which is why I think it's great to be here to talk about this, but also great that it happened in the first place, because I think for the first time ever, we are all seeing AI, kind of the thing that we have imagined it to be for so many years, right? Especially if you're a science fiction fan like myself, you've seen AI, you've heard about AI in all these different sci-fi movies, whether it's C-3PO in Star Wars, or whether it's the computer in Star Trek or something like that. And everyone's conversing with them in human language. And we were yet to achieve that kind of level of conversational fluentness, I guess, with machines. But now with large language models, it seems to have finally arrived. So it's, super interesting time, obviously from a business perspective, but also from a personal interest perspective for me.
Excellent. And I guess, obviously, knowing what you do now, and obviously hearing a little bit about your background there. So the business degree, the software development. Talk to us a little bit more about, I guess, your earlier career, obviously leading Cognigy now, but, is that where it started? What were you involved in beforehand?
So I've always been interested in computers. I was very fortunate to have an 11-year older brother who already had computers ever since I can remember. So I was very young when I could play around with my first computer, which was a Commodore 64, which, for those of you who remember, had the amazing ability that you could code directly into the command prompt in a language called BASIC. So I was always interested in computers and how they worked. And then, so I got a dual degree in computer science and business from a German and an Australian university. And then I worked for a large digital marketing company called Sitecore. It's an enterprise digital marketing system. And that's where I learned the trade of selling enterprise software. And then once we got acquired in 2016, my now co-founder, Sasha Poggeman, approached me. And I didn't know him at the time, but he approached me and said, "Hey, we're from the same city. I want to open up a startup. I want to show you what I have planned. Do you want to meet with me?" And so we met and we talked about his idea, which was quite similar to an Alexa type of device, a smart home device to control. And there's Alexa speaking in the background here. A smart home device or a digital assistant, a voice assistant to control your smart home devices. And so we looked at that use case. We saw Amazon entering the market and we were like, okay, this is probably not it. What is it? But the one thing that we were already super interested in was the ability to now communicate with machines via voice. And so we came up with all these different use cases. And one of the use cases was speaking teddy bear. Now you might think, okay, why a speaking teddy bear? Firstly, because when the teddy bear converses with the kids, it needs to have a certain level of intelligence to really communicate and really be fun, right? So it needs conversational context. What have we already discussed? What have we discussed yesterday? What should I say next, etc. It needs to have user context, right? Who's the kid? What was the kid's preferences? When's the birthday, etc. So that, let's say Thomas walks into the room and goes like, "Hey Bear, how's it going?" The bear goes like, "Oh, hey Thomas, are you looking forward to your birthday tomorrow?" Right? So that's what we call user context. And we were then looking for a tool to build this with. So we built the Bear hardware, the Raspberry Pi at the time, and we were looking for a tool to build the AI stuff with because we weren't going to develop it ourselves. And we looked at the world's seemingly best AI when you look at the marketing ads that were out at the time. I'm not going to say who it is, but let's say it's really good at playing Jeopardy. And yeah, so we tried it out and it was a rather sobering experience. It was nothing like the ads. And so we said, you know what, let's just build it ourselves. And then we did build it ourselves. And that's what then became Cognigy. So very quickly after having built the platform to power the Bear and all the other toy projects we were going to do in the future, we then pivoted back towards enterprise software and moved away from toys as our main target market into customer service. And that's where we've become one of the leaders since.
Wow, I didn't know the backstory. What I'm really interested in and want to know is what happened to the Bear.
The Bear is actually still at our office. It's sitting in one of the meeting rooms. Its innards have been removed.
Oh,
So it's just sitting at a shelf, waiting to be brought back to life. And one day when we're done conquering the customer service world, then we'll get back to it and we're going to actually build that Bear that we wanted to build. And here's the thing. Now, with the new technologies that's out there, it's actually really not that far off, right? I think someone should run with that business idea and build amazing children's toys that can converse in a very natural way, like we were planning to do with the Bear, because I think large language models can most certainly now accomplish that.
I was just thinking about the same thing, the fact that large language models now are likely, one of the technology components that would have made this a lot easier when you first started out. But the good news is for everybody is that large language models weren't around at that point. And so Cognigy was created and we still have you and the platform in the world of customer service, not just in, say, kids entertainment, but always something that I guess you can re-pick up in the future. So we've spoken about large language models. We've spoken about ChatGPT by name, really. Obviously, there is a load of buzz around as a result of this. I'm really keen to just dive in a little bit. How is this going to change the way that you think about conversational AI? And how is that then going to start influencing, let's just say, Cognigy? And how are the clients, I guess, going to benefit from this? Because, again, one of the things I'm seeing a lot of is there's a lot of buzz around, but how you turn something that's a shiny object into something that creates value is often a step that is left up to, people on the ground. And it would be interesting to see where you're seeing the value and what really can clients expect to change as a result of this.
Sure. So I guess there's many questions in what you've just said, and maybe we spend 2 minutes really clarifying some terminology, because I think a lot of people are getting this wrong and don't really understand what it all is. ChatGPT, large language models, the difference. Right, so we should probably spend some quick time on explaining that. So OpenAI has brought out developed a technology called GPT, which is a transformer model, which is by now in version 3, or as some people say, 3.5. And that is an offering that is available via API, and you can integrate with that. ChatGPT, in a way, even though it's not strictly using the GPT API, it's using a specific fine-tuned model of it. But ChatGPT is more or less a demo website at this point, right? So it's a demo that is using GPT under the hood. There's no APIs to ChatGPT right now, right? There are plans to bring those out, but right now there are no official APIs to integrate with ChatGPT. So whenever someone says, yeah, we've integrated with ChatGPT, it means they either have integrated with GPT the model that has an API, or they are hacking into it via a WebSocket connection, which is not a legit way to do it. So these GPT models are what's called large language models, and what they essentially are is they are autocomplete tools on steroids, right? And this kind of demystifies it a little bit. And a lot of people want to have this mystical element to it, right? Oh, it's an AI, and it's like, no, well, it actually isn't, right? It is an autocomplete tool that completes sentences. That's literally all it does, right? So if you say, what is 2 plus 3? And then you let it autocomplete, then it goes like, okay, what's the first word I should say? Should I say the, or should I say airplane, or should I say blue? Maybe I should say the, has the highest probability. Then the next word, result. Should I say result, or should I now say sunglasses, or should I say orange? Okay, result is the highest probability word to be used in this context. And so it continues on completing it token by token, which is also why when you see it completing it in ChatGPT or the GPT API, it's not just coming up with the result instantly, but it's actually doing it token by token. And you have probabilities attached to that. So in a way, it's just an autocomplete tool on steroids. Now, why am I diving into this? Why am I explaining this? Because I think the GPT technology or large language models have more applications than just chat, right? Chat is obvious, right? Someone writes was 3 plus 5, and then it says that the answer is 8, or the result is 8, or maybe it just writes 8. That's a good and useful autocompletion, right? Or if you say, what are the 3 largest capitals in Europe, right? And then it gives you the 3 largest capitals in Europe with its population. This is a good and useful chat-based autocomplete. But you can also do other things, right? You can generate just bits and pieces of content, right? You can, for example, say you're receiving an email. So that's actually one of the things we've built here internally. When you receive an email and it's very long, we have a specific internal email address at Cognigy that you can forward the email to. And then we get the email summarized through GPT, and then it sends you a summary back, right? So it can create content, but it can also understand content, right? So you can say, okay, what's the summary of the email? Or you can classify an email, right? Is it an informational email? Is it a sales email? Is it a support request, etc., etc.? Now, what are we doing with it? So in order to grasp what we're doing with it, maybe a quick explanation of what we actually are. So a conversational AI platform is kind of like a content management system for bots, right? You're building the bots in a graphical interface, and you are teaching the bots to understand certain things, which is something we call intents. And then you are teaching it what to do when it has understood such an intent. So I'll give you an example. Maybe a bot for an airline could understand something like, I need to rebook my flight, or I want a refund for my flight, or I want to book a new flight. So these are 3 different intents: rebook flight, refund flight, and book new flight. Now, what you're doing is you're providing examples for these intents. So let's say rebook flight, you could obviously say, I want to rebook my flight, but not a lot of customers will say that, right? Customers might say, I actually can't make it to my flight and need to change it. Or customers say something really far off, like, next week I was flying to my Aunt Nancy's and she had to cancel her birthday because the cakes couldn't be delivered on time, and now I need to go on another date. All right, so, okay, that's rebook flight, maybe it's refund, right? So this is what you call example sentences. And these example sentences are then mashed together in a machine learning model. And when the user says something, we identify which of the known intents is it. And then based on that, we trigger what's called a conversation flow, where we take the user through a structured flow of how to accomplish what they came to accomplish, like, for example, rebooking a flight. Long story short, how do we use LLMs to make that easier? So we use LLMs on the one hand to augment the authors and editors of current bots. So for example, we can augment intent creation. Rather than coming up with all the intents that an airline bot should have, you can just get a list of all the intents that an airline bot usually can handle and put them into the system. And for each one of those, you don't have to come up with the example sentences, but you can get any number of example sentences generated automatically by a large language model and put into the system. So a task that might have taken weeks before, depending on the amount of research you're doing, right, can now be done actually in a matter of minutes. Similar with something like what we call slots. So a slot is one piece of information, like for example, an airport code. Now, previously you had to somehow compile a list of all the airports and their codes and then upload that into the system or enter it directly into our system. With our integrations of GPT, you can now go in and say, please create a list of all airport codes in the United States and provide the proper airport names as synonyms. And then just a couple of seconds later, you have the list and you no longer need to do this manually. Now, that is one part of the story where we are supporting existing, let's say, content authors, bot authors, in creating bots faster and also better bots. Now, the second part, and that is something we have in a beta version right now, is where we do away with the whole concept of intents, etc., completely, and let the large language model anticipate what the user is after and hold the conversation together with the conversational AI platform. So embed it into the conversational AI platform. Maybe I'll stop there for a second and see if you want to chime in, want to say something, and then we can get to this future version of where we're not just augmenting content and topics using large language models, but where we actually put the large language model in charge of holding the conversation.
There's so much to kind of pick up on in that, and I knew there would be, which is why I was so excited to kind of have you as a guest. And I think that's the thing. There's so many different opportunities. It definitely feels like it's augmenting ways of working with regards to conversational AI. Does it feel to you like we completely need to rip up the rule book then? I know one of the things that we spoke about before was, we will do this in a very different way moving forward. The intent recognition of a large language model is, you may have some stats around this or not, but we, even with no new training, can outperform most of the existing intent recognitions across all the major players. I mean, it feels like there's just something that's completely shifted. Now, I know we're not kind of at end state yet, but it does definitely feel like maybe for the first time, I think we can really get excited about conversational AI. And I think that comes with some pros and some cons. And maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the cons later. But yeah, I just want to hear more from you. Just keep talking to us about how things are going to change.
I believe large language models will not just change conversational AI, but will really change almost every job that's out there, right? I mean, we're already seeing this with software development, for example. We did some ad hoc benchmarks. It's not that easy to do, but we believe that our developers can be 30 to 50% more performant because of the use of large language models, right? There are pieces of code you just don't have to write anymore. Right, the large language model just spits them out for you, and you don't have to go through the tedious work of maybe writing an automated test or something like that. Right, there are applications in legal, there are applications in HR, there are applications in sales. Right, think about all these standard advertising messages you're getting on LinkedIn and whatever. Imagine they were all hyper personalized, and you can do that now with large language models. Right, so there's so much stuff everywhere that's going to be touched by this technology. It's amazing. Now, coming back to conversational AI, it's really interesting because I think we can see a progression here, which is, wow, this is amazing. Now let's think about how we can support the current way we're doing things with large language models, right? So let's take this intent example. One of the first really no-brainers is to go and say, it's really tedious always entering all these example sentences. Shouldn't a large language model already know all these example sentences, and then we can generate them? Now, that's great. But then if the large language model already knows all these example sentences, why do we have to generate them? Why wouldn't we just use the large language model to map the intent in the first place? Because obviously it has inherent knowledge about what a sentence means. And so we could just use the large language model as our NLU system to detect intents. Right, and we have tested this, and it's quite remarkable. So we tested a collection of 64 intents that were put into a large language model, and just the names of the intents. No example sentences, no descriptions, no nothing. Just the names of the intents. And we shot sentences against the model to see the accuracy with which it would map these intents correctly. And it outperformed pretty much any, let's say, legacy NLU system out there on the market, hands down, without any example sentences, right? So it is really good, but it also sometimes does something which we call hallucinate, which means that it comes up with something that's just not right. And now, in understanding language, it's not so important if it hallucinates and it gets something wrong, because normal NLU algorithms would do that too, not hallucinate, but get it wrong. But when it comes to outputting something to the user that is hallucinated, then it becomes more difficult, of course. And that's the thing. So if you look at these 3 stages, so the first stage is, okay, let's augment bot authors and what they're doing at the moment to make their lives easier. Okay, tick, we're already there. Actually, in Cognigy, it's already released. And by the way, I think pretty much every software tool out there on the market, whatever it is, right? Whether it's conversational AI or whether it's a blogging tool, or it doesn't matter what it is. Every single software tool will have LLM-powered features in it in the next 12 months, or it's just not going to survive, right? So that's the augmenting authors capability. Then there's the understanding user inputs capability, which we just talked about. And then there is the ability to understand the user input and hold a conversation, as in also outputting things. This is the most interesting part, and that is what we've been working on for quite a while now. And in the webinar we held on the 26th of January, which you can also find on YouTube, you can hear us calling a bot, and this is not fake, like this is straight out of the lab, the type of conversation you could have with a bot when it's powered by large language models, which are embedded into a conversational AI platform. Because large language models, let's go back to something I said earlier, large language models are autocomplete tools. They are nothing but autocomplete tools at this stage, right? So they're just completing tasks, sentences, right? They're spitting out an answer. They cannot interact with APIs. They cannot really hold context, etc. But you need to add that in by embedding it into a conversational AI platform. So we're using Cognigy to hold state. Where are we in the conversation? What information do we already have? We are using Cognigy to make API requests and trigger other programmatic actions, like maybe some more difficult calculations, because large language models are not really good at calculations either. And so by combining these 2 technologies, we can come to a level of communication with bots that even 5-6 months ago was completely impossible. And that is so natural in a way that you go like, okay, this is what everyone always thought bots or computers should sound like, right? And this has really then thrust conversational AI or bots into the spotlight in a very, very positive way, which of course is great for our industry.
We talked about what kind of is changing or what shouldn't be changing. I was interested in how this affects people. So the people involved in conversational AI right now. And, if I think about, some of the roles that conversational AI has created, a conversation designer would be one of those roles. And I guess you obviously have a chatbot developer, somebody who is taking, let's say, the designs and is building those out into a flow. One of the things you mentioned earlier on, you used the word prompt. And as we think about large language models, the prompt, i.e. what you are asking, becomes increasingly important. And I think when we spoke before, the concept of a prompt engineer as a role came up, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. And the reason I haven't been able to stop thinking about it is because it's not just what you say, it's how you say it in the right format. And as a result of how you have structured the prompt, you may well get a different response. And that's because we're creating, as to your point, each next letter, next bit of code, whatever, is being predicted to be right based on what it thinks. And that, what it's trying to create is from this prompt. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the prompt engineer and your kind of views on that. Maybe what the new skills for a conversation designer, a chatbot developer are going to need to be and evolve to include, kind of as a result of this sort of shift of LLMs, because that, I guess, started to become part and parcel of conversational AI.
Possibly. So I've been thinking about this question quite a bit, and we might be thinking about prompts in the wrong way. So a prompt is an instruction you give to an LM to complete. Yeah, so if I write 2 plus 3 equals, then it's going to complete it with 5. So 5 is the completion, and the prompt is 2 plus 3 equals. This prompt can be at least complex, not really infinitely from a complexity perspective, maybe, but there is a token limit. A word is usually a token. So 2 plus 3 equals might be 4 tokens, or if you count the spaces, some more tokens. And the total number of tokens is limited. Now, the way that I've started thinking about prompts now is that prompts are programming. But they're really programming, but we're not writing code as such, but we're programming in natural language. Because I could also write a program or a prompt. Well, I could write a program, a piece of code, a piece of JavaScript code, where I write a function that adds 2 numbers. So I write a function add, and it has 2 parameters, A and B, and then the result is A plus B. That's easy. Now, I could also tell in a prompt, I could tell the LLM, okay, you are programmed to add 2 numbers. The numbers to add are A and B, right? And then when the user uses this prompt, it fills in something for A and B, and then the correct answer comes out. So we are programming, but we're not programming by actually writing code, but we're programming by writing instructions, just like we would tell a human these instructions. Now, of course, adding is actually a really good example, because for most people of a certain age, you would not need to tell them how to add 2 numbers, because they would already know it. They have base knowledge, right? And so does the LLM. I don't have to teach the LLM how to add 2 numbers. It most likely can do it already because it has base knowledge. Now, if it comes to something more complex, I will need to give the examples. So let's say I have a program that takes a customer number and it appends a code, depending on the country where the customer is from. And you say, okay, so you have a customer number, you have the country where the person is from, and then you append the ISO code of the country to the beginning, etc. So you need to give it an example. So you need to say, okay, Phil's customer number is 123. He's from Germany. The ISO code is DE, so it's DE123, for example. And then you can shoot something else against the LLM, and it's going to give you the correct answer. Now, I think this is really interesting, because if we look at prompts as coding, then it does not mean that conversation designers are going away, because conversation designers at the moment are also not writing code, but they are using tools that abstract from the code, right? Maybe some conversation designers are writing code, but most would be using visual tools like Cognigy to build conversation flows in a visual manner. Right? There's a lot of code under the hood, obviously, but the conversation designers are not seeing that code and are not touching that code. Now, it would be my view that in the future, when you build conversations, you're also not writing prompts, but you are controlling a visual tool set like Cognigy that is then on your behalf building the prompt and executing it in the correct way against the large language models. No, I don't think prompt engineers will make conversation designers go away. I think prompt engineers will work hand in hand with conversation designers, just like code engineers also work hand in hand with conversation designers at the moment. Like in Cognigy, you can do everything visually, but you have the ability to also inject code at any point in the conversation. And now, with the newest version that we have out now, you can also execute a prompt at any point in the conversation, right? So, no, I don't think that prompt engineers will make conversation designers go away, but I think that they will actually work hand in hand together with coders and conversation designers and prompt engineers, because I think prompt engineering is really a new paradigm of software development, and that's why it's not going to make traditional conversation design go away.
Okay, slight slant on the question then. If we're not making conversation design take away, should software developers be worried?
Probably, for several reasons. So the first one, and again, here we you remember what we discussed earlier, where LLMs are supporting bot authors and creating content for the current way they're building things, and then we're moving to LLMs are actually doing the thing themselves. And we're seeing the same thing with code, right? So right now, LLMs are being used a lot to augment software developers, so they don't have to write, for example, automated tests and stuff like this, because the LLM can just do it, or the LLM can review code that they've written, etc., etc. So this is augmenting the current way of doing things. Now, I read an interesting article, I think it was last week or the week before, which boldly stated that backend development will disappear and be replaced by LLMs. No, well, whilst I think that's probably a bit far-fetched, it is probably true to a certain extent, because here's what it means. If you are writing an app, and the app they used in the example was a list of to-dos, right? So you have to-dos, and these to-dos have titles, and they have descriptions, and they have dates by when they have to be done. Now, this is just a data structure. Now, in traditional software development, you would now write functions that you can execute against this set of data. So, for example, list all to-dos sorted by date. That this could be a function, and then you would write it, how it makes a database query, takes the data, sorts it, and outputs it back to a front end, right? Or you would say fetch description of task X, and then you put the ID of a task in of a to-do, and then you get the description back. Now, amazingly, with LLMs, you don't have to do that anymore. You can put the data into the LLM as part of the prompt, and then you can literally just say, the following API call has been made against this data, and you just write rather verbose API call, like, for example, fetch all to-dos sorted by date, and then you say, what is the output? And then the LLM, quite magically so, outputs the correct output. All your to-dos sorted by date. Now you say, fetch all to-dos sorted by date, and shorten the descriptions to a max of 50 characters, and if it has more than 50 characters, add a dot to the end. And there comes the result. And you don't have to write the code anymore. You just have to write the correct prompt. Right? And that is something, that is a new paradigm of how we will be interacting with data, which I think is going to be super interesting in software development. It's going to be super interesting in data engineering, in business intelligence, right? Imagine you have all these data analytics tools like Power BI or whatever, and now all of a sudden, using large language models, you can interact with the data, and then it's going to give you really good answers back and new ways of displaying the data. So, yeah, I think there's really something there that is going to shake up software development as we know it. And it's possible that in 20 years' time, we'll be looking back, and kids who are then learning how to develop software are going to look at us like Stone Age people and go like, they actually wrote every single function in code, right? And then they made mistakes, and they had tools that then highlighted the mistakes in red on the screen, etc. And maybe by that time, large language models or a successor to them are so good that you're literally just describing a task, and it's doing it with such high precision and accuracy that you no longer need to develop the function in the more traditional way.
Well, you only have to look at a child who sees the old landline telephone with the dial that you used to have to spin round to do your numbers to know that, the technology moves on, that people will look and say, what, you didn't have mobile phones, and that's the phone that you used, and it was connected via a wire in your house, and you had to remember everyone's telephone numbers because none of them were stored in it. And that was in my childhood. So I can absolutely see how already this big shift is going to happen without a doubt. And
that's actually funny. Like the example you gave is funny, because I thought about the exact same thing with this dial phone yesterday, because my daughter, she's 2 years old. One of the toys she has is this Fisher-Price chatter telephone. And that is still that kind of phone, right? But she probably has no clue what it is that she's dragging around, because all the phones she knows are smartphones, right? But she thinks it's funny and she loves it. But this whole story with the save icon, right? That used to be a disk, but now it's just the save icon, and kids don't really know why it looks like that, right? But yeah, you're right. And we are most certainly going to enter a world where kids don't know the traditional way of programming. But you know what? I mean, we're actually not that old. The truth is, we also don't really know the traditional way of programming, right? I mean, if you go 2 generations up, these guys were programming in assembly or something even closer to the machine. None of us has ever done that other than maybe for a test in uni. So we keep moving up, and maybe prompt engineering is the next step up and the next abstraction layer of how we are going to be interacting with machines. Because what is programming? It's interacting with machines. That's it, right? It's interacting with data that sits inside of machines. And so, yeah, this may very well be replaced, or at least in part replaced, by prompts. But the thing is that this is all crystal ball stuff. Nobody knows. 6 months ago, we didn't even know what a prompt was, right? Well, some of us did, but most people didn't. And now we're all talking about it, making predictions and stuff, and it's fun. But who knows what's really going to happen? All we know is that it's most certainly super interesting what's happening at the moment, and that it at least smells like a true AI revolution that we have on our hands this time around.
Agreed. I think there's so many good points in there that I completely concur with, and how funny that we both came up with the exact same phone example. And I even know the exact Fisher Price phone that said that your child has, as mine has had a very similar one. Thankfully, I don't remember them ever asking whether they could watch YouTube on it, unlike my smartphone. I'm conscious of time. This has been a super interesting episode. I do want to touch on one thing before we kind of draw a close to the episode, though. Now, we've spoken a lot about, obviously, LLMs. We've spoken about prompts. I want to kind of dive in a little bit about the responses, though. And I guess one of the things that I'm acutely aware of, having seen and played around with this for a while, is just because it looks and smells like fact doesn't often mean that the response is factually accurate. And there's lots of examples where questions are, the answers are a bit wrong, and that's fair enough. But from an enterprise perspective, factually wrong in the public domain is not usually something that we would really want to, I guess, put or give ourselves the risk. And so it feels like in the public domain, especially at an enterprise level, the use of large language models to, I guess, take over traditional decision tree type conversational design is probably a little way off. And I know certainly the ones I've been involved in, the engagements I've been involved in, marketing, customer experience, other departments have all got involved because they want to know exactly what we are going to say to our customers, because our customers are important and we don't want to say anything. It has to be the right tone of voice. It has to be this, it has to be that. So I guess my worry, and that's not a worry, but my thought process here is, are we, even though the technology is in the main, do we think the enterprise is ready for actual adoption versus, playing with it in a playground right now? And, is there a trust issue that we need to get over with so that we can trust enough to, I guess, in part at least, let loose or let the business users loose on customer-facing technologies? We could just get your thoughts on that.
So many different thoughts on that. Obviously, trust is very important. And so the way I'm thinking about this is, we're used to automated content being correct or intentionally incorrect, right? In case of fake news. So if you read something on the Allianz Insurance website, then you can be sure that it's correct. And if it's incorrect, you can actually use it to legal battle against them, right? This is how it is at the moment. And so this is why the bots that are currently being built by those types of companies, the outputs of the bots are completely curated. There's no way that a bot is going to output something incorrect and then potentially harmful for this enterprise, unless it has been put incorrectly into the bot by a human. So that is the way it is at the moment, which is very safe, right? Then on the other hand, if you call a call center, there is a certain chance that the call center agent that you are speaking to also tells you something incorrect. Like I had this experience, I called an airline in another country, and it had this problem with my flight and so on. And at one point, the agent said, yeah, okay, this issue is so complex that they can't really resolve it for me. So it would be easier if they just refunded the flights and I booked a new flight, because I had to split the ticket and split some people out and things like that. And I said, okay, this is great. And they said, yeah, okay, perfect. So I'm going to issue the refund now, and then you can book the new flight. So I went off and I booked the new flight, and then I didn't get my refund. And then I escalated this, and they said, your flight was not refundable. I said, yeah, but I was told that it was refundable. And they said, well, we don't have any record about it. So long story short, these mistakes happen whether they are automated or not, right? So one way to counter that, other than, of course, improving the large language models to only output factual information, which is possible, right? Like with Cognigy, we can already rein in the LLMs to say, okay, only answer things that we have told you, right? By, for example, connecting it against a knowledge base or something like this, or otherwise say that you don't know the answer to the question. And this works well in 99% of cases already. So we can already rein that in. But then there's also the way to say that, okay, the bots only prepare things. So let's say it's a refund request. The bot works with the customer through the refund request. And then before it's triggered, it goes to a call center agent. And the call center agent doesn't interact with the customer. But the call center agent looks the case through and goes like, okay, this is correct, let's action it. Or if it's not correct, then the call center agent can interfere and say, yeah, we're very sorry that there was a mistake. I'm going to handle it. Because why are companies using bots in contact centers? It's all about something called deflection or containment, right? So handle as many customer issues as you can in an automated way, right? So that they don't have to go to an agent, because agents are very expensive and there's never enough agents available anyways. So I think if there is a way to increase containment without compromising on the ultimate quality of issue resolution by, for example, working hand in hand with humans, I think this is something that can go a long way in earning the trust in the enterprise. But you're right. I mean, of course, we are speaking to pretty much any single one of our customers on this topic at the moment. And because this is so new, this whole AI topic is all of a sudden so new for these companies. In some large enterprise with 100, 200, 300,000 employees, the question is, okay, who decides this, right? And then new guidelines have to be written and things like that. And everyone is really discovering this together, not just the developers, not just the authors, right? The legal departments, the corporate branding departments, et cetera, et cetera. So let's not forget, we're really early days. And we all have to find our ways around this, of how to use this. We at Cognigy are trying to make it as safe as possible. It is not possible at this moment to make it 100% safe, to guarantee in a 100% way that the bot is not going to say something that it shouldn't say. But if you look at companies like Microsoft, who are obviously heavily invested in this space, when you're speaking with them, they are saying the number one thing they are working on for large language models is to remove the hallucinations, right? To really make sure that the bots are not saying something that they shouldn't say. Because, of course, this is the biggest inhibitor to getting the trust from the enterprises. And that means the biggest inhibitor to doing business with the enterprises, with the large language models. So it's certainly the number one topic that's on everyone's list to rein in, create that trust by combining different ways of reining in these hallucinations.
Excellent. I think that's really useful. And I like the point that, hallucinations are the biggest inhibitor to enterprise adoption. So an enterprise adoption really is where the revenue is going to come from. It's not going to be from bit part users like myself paying a small monthly subscription for some support. It's going to be big enterprise consumption. So it's great to know, that it's been concentrated on, but also what you guys are doing with regards to doing what you can in order to ensure responses are as accurate and truthful as possible. So superb. Phil, this has been an absolute whirlwind of an episode. So much insight to try and unpack. So thank you to you. Thank you to the listeners. And we'll speak to you again on Bots and Beyond in a couple of weeks.